Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Brief for Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Michael Jenkins, president of the Washington Times Foundation, which sponsors this webcast. Dr. Jenkins is also chairman of the Washington Times Holdings, the LLC that owns the Times News organization. He has led many successful fact-finding trips to Korea for policy experts and peace initiatives to the Middle East for the Universal Peace Federation. Dr. Jenkins, Happy New Year and welcome.
Oh, thank you, Larry, for all you do for the Washington Brief. Our program today on this January 2nd is a very important area of discussion, catalyst for conflict on the Korean Peninsula, a belligerent North Korea aligned with Russia, China, and Iran creates a volatile chemistry. We're very honored to present this day our key speaker, Admiral Harry Harris. Widely regarded for his leadership, Admiral Harris was selected to serve by two presidential administrations. First, to lead in one of the military's most challenging roles at a critical time when the U.S. confronted the rise of new world powers and nuclear threats, and later as U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Korea. With close to half a century in public service, commanding high, complex, high-stakes organizations and advancing international relations, Admiral Harris offers a rare perspective on leadership, geopolitical affairs, and current events in a way that only an American officer, as well as diplomat and former military head of PACOM, could really bring forth. Admiral Harris took command of the U.S. PACOM in 2015, the oldest multi-service command that stretches from California to the Indian Ocean and from the Arctic Sea to Antarctica. As commander, he ensured America's joint forces were postured and prepared to support the combined forces commander in South Korea against aggression from the North. He was the first American of Japanese descent to lead the Indo-Pacific Command and the highest ranking Asian American in the history of the United States Navy. Admiral Harris served in a variety of roles in the U.S. Navy, including as representative of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to Secretaries of State Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, and commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. A naval flight officer, he served in very geographic combatant region and participated in several major operations, including Desert Shield and Storm, Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, and Odyssey Dawn. In total, Admiral Harris logged 4,400 total flight hours, including more than 400 combat hours. He retired from the military as a four-star admiral in June of 2018 and was appointed as U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Korea. He served in that position until January of 2021, and he served with distinction. As ambassador, he ensured the White House's position on numerous issues, including the U.S. Republic of Korea and Special Measures Agreement, the UN sanctions regime against North Korea, and the Inter-Korean dialogue, and all the administration's concerns about the threat from the People's Republic of China were clearly understood by the Blue House. He promoted American business interests in South Korea amid deepening economic ties between South Korea. For his service, Admiral Harris has been awarded numerous medals, including State Department's Distinguished Honor Award, the CIA's Agency's SEAL Medal, and Ambassador's Award, and the Defense Distinguished Service Medals, 3 Navy Distinguished Service Medals, and 3 Legions of Merit. Our moderator today is well known throughout the intelligence community, as well as the diplomatic community, and also the university associations in this nation. Our Ambassador Joseph DeTrani is a commentator on security issues. Formerly, Ambassador DeTrani was special envoy for the six-party talks with North Korea, the director of National Counterproliferation Center, and associate director of national intelligence. Dr. Alexandre Mansourov, our panelist, to also give commentary, is the adjunct professor of security studies at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service in Georgetown University. He's also an adjunct professor of Korean Studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University and Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. We're looking to have a great program today. Thank you, Ambassador DeTrani. Please go forward.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you for the introduction. We have a great program today with Admiral Harris. Let me set the scene before I reach out to Admiral Harris to analyze what's going on in the region. On December 18th, we just saw North Korea successfully launched a solid fuel road mobile ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, the Hwasong-18, that has a range that could target the whole of the United States. This was the third, I emphasize this was the third successful launch of an ICBM this year by North Korea. And it coincided with senior level North Korean meetings in Beijing, which followed Kim Jong-un's September meetings in Russia's Far East with President Vladimir Putin and the subsequent visit of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov for meetings in Pyongyang with Kim Jong-un. This, given the concern that North Korea is providing Russia with artillery shells and rockets for their war in Ukraine. And at the recent Korean Workers' Party Congress this past week, Kim Jong-un stressed the need to accomplish the country's 5-year development plan, stressing the importance of agriculture, given the reported food shortages in North Korea. And at this Congress, and I emphasize this, at this Congress last week, Kim Jong-un called for the military to accelerate war preparations due to the unprecedented anti-North Korean confrontation with the United States. This, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, while the U.S. has been working closely with the Republic of Korea and Japan on enhanced nuclear deterrence, with meetings of the Nuclear Consultative Group to share real-time information on North Korea. Indeed, senior Biden administration officials stated publicly and clearly that any North Korean nuclear attack will be the end of the North Korean regime. Given these developments, we're fortunate to have Admiral Harris with us today to analyze these developments. Admiral Harris, over to you, sir.
Well, thanks, Dr. Jenkins, for the nice introduction, and to Ambassador DeTrani for the lead-in there. And thanks to the Washington Times Foundation for putting on this very timely podcast. I'm honored to join Ambassador DeTrani and Drs. Mansourov and Jenkins this morning. Gentlemen, it's good to be with you again. A year ago, I spoke about 3 big things: the Korean Peninsula, China, and Russia on Ukraine. The year before, I gave a tour of the horizon across 12 topics. This time, I want to talk about the issue at hand, the potential alignment that we're seeing taking shape between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. So let's get to it. This is a time of anniversaries, and 4 come to mind. 2023 marks the 70th anniversary of the U.S.-South Korea alliance. December marks 1 year since the Chinese spy balloon drama, which illustrated the PRC's bad behavior and disregard for international norms. That Beijing would claim that this incursion over sovereign American airspace was innocuous and unattended beggars the imagination. February, we'll see the Russia on Ukraine war enter its 3rd year, and we're nearing the 10th anniversary of Russia's invasion and annexation of Crimea. And this month marks the 3rd month since Hamas launched terror attacks against Israel. So let me begin by addressing the attack into Israel by Hamas last October. This was terrorism, plain and simple. Over 1,000 Israelis, including women, children, and the elderly, were subjected to unspeakable cruelty, murder, and rape, and hundreds were taken hostage. This is pure evil, and it baffles me that there are those who seek to justify Hamas's actions. We know that Hamas, which is dedicated to the destruction of Israel and has been labeled a terrorist organization by the US and the UK, among many others, that Hamas draws its support from Iran. We see Iran's support of Hamas in Gaza, of Hezbollah in Iraq, where it is attacking American troops there, and of the Houthis in Yemen, who are using drones and missiles to attack commercial shipping with impunity in the Red Sea north of the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. The Wall Street Journal reported last month that Iran is providing not only weapons, but also maritime intelligence to the Houthis regarding merchant ship location, ships upon which a significant portion of the world's trade depends. Dr. James Holmes, writing in the National Interest, said that the Houthis have fired anti-ship ballistic missiles against these merchant ships. This was confirmed by U.S. Central Command. Where did the Houthis get this technology? Your guess is as good as mine, maybe better, but China looms large as a possibility. Now, I'm not suggesting that China deliberately or intentionally provided the Houthis with this capability, only that they are one of the few nations in the world which possesses this technology. You can draw your own conclusions. For me, I agree with retired General and former CENTCOM Commander Frank McKenzie, who recently argued for a more forceful, read kinetic, response against the Houthis. In my opinion, to do otherwise is to invite a Houthi-launched Golden BB, finally hitting one of our ships and killing American sailors. The Houthis respect strength. Everything else they regard as weakness. So now I'll briefly touch upon Russia. There's too much to talk about here, not enough time to do it. So I'll simply start with a question. Why hasn't Russia, which has had its own share of experiences against terrorism, for example, the Second Chechen War, support to the U.S. after 9/11, actions ostensibly against ISIS in Syria, and the Afghan-Soviet War itself, why hasn't Russia condemned Hamas? Why hasn't Russia labeled Hamas a terrorist organization? Now, I'm no expert. I'll leave that to pros like Dr. Mansourov here, but Milan Cherny and Dan Storyev of the Carnegie Endowment suggest that Russia is trying to curry favor and to be regarded as a friend of the global South. According to them, Putin was one of the first leaders to congratulate Hamas on their electoral victory over Fatah in 2006, the last time Gazans saw free elections, I might add. But you don't have to believe me. Here's what Hamas itself said following its October 7th terrorist attacks against Israel. Quote, "We appreciate Russian President Vladimir Putin's position regarding the ongoing Zionist aggression against our people," unquote. So now let me talk briefly about Ukraine by first acknowledging, as I did last year, the unconscionable human tragedy that's being perpetuated by Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine. I also cautioned last year that even though Putin has failed spectacularly, after all, this war is about to enter its third year, despite Putin having predicted a blitzkrieg of Kyiv in 15 days, as well as Russia having suffered maybe 300,000 casualties and finding itself relying on Wagner mercenaries, Iranian drones, and North Korean artillery shells. Even so, the mass of the Russian military can't be ignored. As Stalin apocryphally said, because he didn't actually say it, quantity has a quality all its own. But don't be like Putin and underestimate the resolve of the Ukrainians or the resolve of the West, especially the U.S. For sure, there are cracks in even our resolve. We see that play out in Congress every day. As retired Admiral Jim Stavridis recently said, and I'll quote him, "The real action is actually not in Kyiv. The real action is in Washington. We've got to provide the military support to Ukraine. Their cause is just, plus half the Russian army has been destroyed without any U.S. soldiers being killed or even placed at risk. We can afford to do this, and we should," unquote. Gentlemen, I believe we will do the right thing and continue to support Ukraine. We must. Now, in the interest of time, let me move on to North Korea. As I've said before, North Korea stands out as the only nation this century to test nuclear weapons. Its unrelenting pursuit of nuclear weapons, the means to deliver them, and its unmitigated aggression towards South Korea and America should concern us all. Now, I believe KGU wants four things: sanctions relief, to keep his nukes, to split our alliance, and to dominate the peninsula. Last September, KGU stated unequivocally that he'd never give up his nukes, and that North Korea's status as a nuclear weapon state is irreversible. KGU has declared his intent to exponentially increase his country's nuclear arsenal and develop a new ICBM. Finally, South Korea's National Intelligence Service just said last month that KGU has directed the preparation of a plan that will, quote, cause a big stir, unquote, in South Korea early in 2024. Is this bluster or is this warning? Whatever it is, it doesn't sound to me like he's going to get rid of his nukes anytime soon. In fact, he's telling us precisely the opposite. In 2022 alone, the North launched over 70 missiles of increasing complexity. A year ago, we saw multiple drone incursions across the DMZ. And now Kim Jong-un is trading low-cost weapons for Russian technology in order to put satellites into orbit. Why am I not surprised? Clearly, this is no path towards peace. While we hope for diplomacy with North Korea to be successful, we must recognize that hope alone is not a course of action. The quest for dialogue with the North must never be made at the expense of the ability to respond to threats from the North. Dialogue and military readiness must go hand in hand. Idealism must be rooted in realism. Gentlemen, I believe that our heretofore U.S. policy goal of negotiating away North Korea's nuclear program has reached its useful end. We must up our combined game. Deterrence by appeasement is not deterrence at all. This is why I'm encouraged that South Korean President Yoon places a primacy on defending South Korea against a threat from the North, which means a return to joint military exercises and an emphasis on combined readiness. I'm heartened by his outreach to Japan. Last April, he traveled there for bilateral meetings with Prime Minister Kishida, the first such meeting by a sitting South Korean president in a dozen years. This is statesmanship in action. President Yoon was also in the U.S. for a state visit with President Biden in April. This visit underscored the vitality and global importance of our alliance. The outcomes of this visit are significant, including the Washington Declaration on extended nuclear deterrence. So now let me move on to the elephant in every room, and that's China. There are very few bipartisan issues in Washington these days, but our national concern about the PRC is one of them. Washington and Beijing fundamentally disagree on how to approach the current international order. The PRC doesn't keep its word, from its treaty with the British on Hong Kong to its human rights abuses against the Uyghurs and others, to commercial espionage and weaponization of debt, and its quest to intimidate, isolate, and finally dominate Taiwan. The recent actions against the Philippines in the international waters of the South China Sea speak directly to Beijing's disregard for international norms. As I testified before the U.S. Senate when I was in uniform and again before the House just this past February, I believe that Beijing seeks hegemony, not only in East Asia, but Greater Asia and beyond. Now, I note that the Biden administration's fundamental understanding of the PRC is consistent with its predecessor. Consider that Secretary of State Blinken testified that the previous administration's tougher approach is right, that what's happening in Xinjiang is genocide, and the democracy is being trampled in Hong Kong. Secretary of Defense Austin testified that he's focused on the threat posed by the PRC, and he promised strong support for Taiwan. Now, I was in Taiwan last February for the Council on Foreign Relations, again last May as Indo-PACOM senior advisor for Taiwan's annual Hong Kong exercise, where I met with President Tsai, and again most recently last month. In my opinion, Russia on Ukraine has galvanized them. They get it, but they need our tangible support, not our best wishes. All eyes on Taiwan's presidential elections later this month. Now back to the PRC. I was pleased with the recent meeting between President Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping in San Francisco on the margins of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. And I'm pleased that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff finally had a phone call with his counterpart in China, both long overdue. For sure now, it's okay to be optimistic, even hopeful. After all, optimism is the heart of diplomacy. However, as with North Korea, idealism must be rooted in realism. And as we saw in the PRC's last press conference of 2023, Chinese talking points haven't changed a bit. I'm not surprised. Just consider Beijing's support for North Korea, Russia, Iran, Syria, and the Taliban. The administration's approach to the PRC, assertive transparency is the right course in my mind. I'm an advocate for reinforcing diplomacy with hard power when dealing with Beijing. Now, let me conclude by trying to tie all of this together to get at the original issue of the developing nexus between China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. I believe world events are bringing them closer together. And I believe the war in Ukraine makes Putin desperate for sources of weapons, resources, and quite frankly, diplomatic friends. I also believe the quest for technology is bringing North Korea into alignment with Russia and Iran into alignment with both. However, China, unlike Russia, North Korea, or Iran, has a trade-dependent global economy. For now, at least, I believe that Beijing doesn't want to further alienate the US or Europe. As I noted last year, while China is supportive of Russia and Moscow's war against Ukraine, Beijing is far from all in on Russia. I still believe this. In fact, I tend to agree with the South China Morning Post that China is cautious about being drawn into a trilateral axis with Russia and North Korea, fearing that it could trigger a new Cold War that could actually advance U.S. interests in the region. Okay, enough for now. Let me stop here and get to this discussion phase. Thanks very
Admiral
much.
Harris, that was excellent. Thank you so much. You talked about the axis of authoritarian states, and you went into each of them in great detail. Very powerful. I'll look to Dr. Mansourov. Could you start the conversation, Dr. Mansourov?
Okay, thank you, Ambassador, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. Now, let me start by expressing my wish for the new year, that my heartfelt wish that the carnage which we saw in Europe last year and in the Middle East finally come to an end in this new year. Ambassador, Admiral Harris mentioned a staggering number, over 300,000 Russians killed or wounded. But that's one side of the equation. On the other side of the equation, there are more than half a million Ukrainians who either lost their lives or were severely wounded. And so we're looking at almost 1 million people who were either killed or wounded, badly wounded in that bloodshed and that carnage, and that violence must stop. I mean, Admiral said, yes, the United States hasn't lost a single man in a uniform. Some contractors, Americans, were killed in that war, but not people in the armed forces of the United States yet. So my wish is that in this year, we will not see the expansion of that horrible conflict into something which many people talk about, the Third World War, or something like that. Again, in the Middle East, yes, October 7th attack was a pure act of evil, terrorism on display. 1,400 Israelis killed. But let's not forget 20,000 plus Palestinians who already lost their lives in the bloodshed that we saw unfolding before our eyes last year. So again, my wish is for peace to return, for calm to prevail, and for the end of these dramatic conflicts in two actually critical theaters for the United States. Now, again, outstanding presentation by the Admiral, very little to add. So I just want to kind of zero in on his thinking about the most important developments in 2023. So if you can highlight for our viewers and listeners one most important development in your opinion which took place last year on the Korean Peninsula, one critical, the most important development which is going to shape our future in Northeast Asia, and one most important development on a global scale, which we all will not only remember, but will have our lives will be shaped by it for the years to come. I would really appreciate it. So 3 critical developments last year, which kind of stand out in your mind: one in Korea, one in Northeast Asia, and one globally. I would appreciate it, sir.
Is that back to me?
Yes, it's back to
Back-
you.
back
It's
to
just
you,
to
Admiral.
kind of because there was a lot, and I'm just wondering. I mean, those 3 critical developments: one in Korea, one in Northeast Asia, and one globally, which we will all remember from the year gone.
Okay. Well, I think our Ambassador DeTrani mentioned it. I think the development of solid fuel capability, road mobile capability by the North Koreans is significant. I don't know if it's the most significant. There's so much going on the Korean Peninsula, but I think that's critical. I think that equally important, though in a different vein, in Northeast Asia is President Yoon's outreach to Japan and his willingness to put his political fortunes at significant risk in Korea, because he believes that an outreach to Japan is the right thing to do. So I think in terms of soft power, that's probably the most important thing that's happened on the Korean Peninsula, and it's significant. And we'll see how it plays out. There are elections, not presidential elections, but there are elections coming up this year in 2024 in Korea, and we'll see if his statesmanship has any traction. With regard to the region, I think China's bad behavior is continuing unabated, and we're seeing a higher risk of kinetic actions in the South China Sea with the Philippines, which is, I might add, in case anyone misses the important fact, that the United States is a treaty ally of the Republic of the Philippines. So the China's bad behavior there continues to be a concern. I think, as I mentioned in my remarks, we saw on their last press conference of 2023, just last week, they took the same talking points to the microphone again, and I'm not seeing that abate any. This year coming up in less than 2 weeks, I think the 12th of January, we're going to see presidential elections in Taiwan. That'll have some reverberations through the region. I just read an op-ed last week in the Wall Street Journal that talks about the fact that China really has no friends in Taiwan. I mean, both the DPP and the KMT, the Kuomintang Party, the two primary parties that are contesting the election, plus the third party, they're all speak strongly against China's bad behavior. So China really has no friends there, regardless of the outcome. But all eyes, as I mentioned in my remarks, all eyes on Taiwan. Globally, Dr. Mansourov, I think you nailed it. I mean, we're seeing the conflicts in the Middle East expand with the Houthis in the Red Sea, Hezbollah in Iraq, and all helped and supported by Iran. So the stuff in the Red Sea that affects global shipping, that has to stop. So as I mentioned in my remarks, I've called for kinetic action against the Houthis. I think we need to do that. They respect nothing but strength, and for us to for the world really to tolerate these attacks, sooner or later, some of those drones, some of those anti-ship ballistic missiles are going to hit their mark, and we're going to lose Americans because of it unless we take action as we should. So I think that's a problem area as well, and the fact that they've gone on for as long as they have in 2023 without action to stop them, I think is significant, and we need to to change that calculus. And I don't want to get into AI and all that, but these are the things that are dominating the headlines last year, and I think we'll see them continue to dominate this year.
Thank you, Admiral Harris. That was excellent. Let me make a comment and then ask you a question, Admiral Harris, further to Dr. Mansorov's questions. One, you mentioned the South China Morning Post and some of the commentary indicating that China may be concerned about their close relationship with the Russian Federation and with North Korea, and certainly with Iran, with their terrorist activities, with the proxies and the wars that's going on with Hamas and its horrific treatment of killings of over 1,200 Israelis and foreigners on the 7th of October. So if China is concerned about that, and I think China should be concerned. I mean, we saw Italy recently just pulling out of the Belt and Road Initiative. We see a lot of stagnation in China now with foreign companies pulling out, saying, do we want to do business in China? Certainly in Hong Kong, we see that in spades. Do we want to do business in Hong Kong, where the rule of law doesn't permeate the environment any longer? And there are such uncertainties. So if China is concerned about that, shouldn't that be sort of an impetus for them to sort of say, maybe they could ingratiate themselves, if that's the right word, with the United States and with the other liberal democracies, and try to get North Korea back to negotiations? And certainly China played a major role in the six-party talks with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who headed those talks in 2005, when we had a joint statement committing North Korea to complete verifiable dismantlement of all nuclear weapons in return for a number of deliverables. So Admiral, and I agree with you, I just don't see North Korea giving up their nuclear weapons. But would there be some advantage for China to get at least North Korea to come back to negotiations to show some progress on that, given the tension China is experiencing themselves domestically with their economy, et cetera, but internationally with the erosion of their credibility now, working so closely with the Russian Federation, Iran, and North Korea? Do you see China taking some initiative in that area?
No. I can expand on that if you want, but I think that we're imparting a degree of our own belief system onto China, which has been the problem, in my opinion, for the last half century. We have believed for 50 years that by bringing China into the world system, China will somehow grow and morph into something resembling us, resembling a democracy, and that's simply not the case. And here we are in 2024, left with a notion that we see play out in China's last press conference of the year, where they're threatening a treaty ally of the United States over their position, over the Chinese position, that the entirety of the South China Sea is somehow territorial water of China. We see their threats against democratic elections in Taiwan, even though, as I mentioned, regardless of who wins in Taiwan, the relationship with China is fundamentally different now than it would have been, than it was, say, a decade ago. The Taiwanese position vis-a-vis China is different than it was a decade ago, because of China's repeated bad behavior that we see play out in places like Hong Kong and their air incursions across the median line in the Taiwan Strait. So I don't think that we're going to see China change its stripes in any dramatic fashion. And to believe it would is to make hope a course of action. That said, I think China is extremely pragmatic. They are a learning machine and a learning nation. And I think that's why they're hedging. They don't want to be drawn into a trilateral alliance with Russia and North Korea. They don't want to be drawn into a quadrilateral alliance that includes Iran. That said, they're supportive of all of those countries, as they are supportive of the Taliban and others. But I think that they're exercising a degree of caution, as we would, in our alliance structures. So I'll leave it at that, subject to additional.
Thank you, Admiral Harris. Please, over to you, Dr. Mansourov.
Hey, thank you, Ambassador. And I can't agree more with Admiral's commentary on China. And so I'd like to pivot in a slightly different direction, anchoring my thoughts in Admiral's own saying that idealism must be rooted in realism. And I look at what's going in Europe, in Ukraine, and I'm really surprised at your assessment that we're winning, Russia is losing, and all that. Because if you look at what's going on, I mean, there were expectations, high expectations about the Ukrainian counteroffensive, backed with all the armaments supplied by the Western coalition, of course, with Ukrainian armed forces kind of spearheading the effort. And yet, at the end of the year, whether strategically you look at it, Russia is doing okay, it's not isolated, its economy is growing, I mean, its military-industrial complex finally has been jump-started, and they're producing not just 3, 4, 5 times, but 17, 20 times more tanks, artillery pieces, artillery shells, aircraft, jets than they did before that war started. They were able to hold the battle line, the line of combat where it was a year ago. And so our strategic objective of, at least publicly announced strategic objective of delivering the strategic defeat to Russia after isolating it from the global community, and not only defeating it on the battlefield, but undermining it on the inside, from the inside. I mean, we are not there. I mean, we complain about North Koreans shipping a few 100,000 artillery shells to a country which last year expended 17 million artillery shells. And by the way, our allies in Europe promised 1 million artillery shells to our party, Ukraine, and yet failed to deliver less than 300,000. So my concern is that I know for kind of strategic communications purposes, for kind of propaganda purposes, as part of information warfare, yes, we want to deliver that message that we're winning, they're losing, and we're on the right track. But realistically, I mean, you're a Navy admiral. I mean, you have decades of warfare experience. My question, I'm not questioning your judgment or anything, but military judgment. But was there anything which surprised you, last year in terms of the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine? Yes, 2022 was a bad year for Russia, no question about it. They were pushed back, lost some ground. Again, the expectations were high for them. Earlier that year, again, came to a crushing kind of landing. But last year, 2023, the situation changed, and it changed dramatically and not in our favor. I mean, if you compare it with World War I experience, with World War II experience, we're somewhere about 1915, 16, or 1942, 43 now. It's a long game. And what I see is happening is, all these high hopes for a quick kind of counteroffensive victory, isolating and undermining that country from within and on the battlefield, proved to be misplaced and disappointing. And we are very far from that expectation and those high hopes. So my question is very simple. What was the most surprising development for you last year? Was there anything at all, whether in Ukraine or the Middle East or anywhere, which really surprised you? You expected one thing, and then, what you saw really caught you off guard and surprised you last year?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've given me a lot to think about to end up on a simple question. So let me try to get at some of that and then answer the specific question as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure, 2023 didn't go, the combat in Ukraine didn't go as a lot of people thought it, maybe hoped it would. But in the bigger picture, in a month or so, it'll be 1,095 days since Russia invaded Ukraine. And Putin predicted that he could take Kyiv in 15 days. Now, I'm not going to do any public arithmetic here in front of everybody, but if you divide 1,095 by 15, I mean, that's a massive underestimation, or overestimation rather, of Putin's capabilities. He's still at it, and he still hasn't taken Kyiv. And so for a country which purports to be as great militarily as Russia is, that's a crushing failure. Sweden is almost in NATO, and Finland is in NATO, two countries that have been proudly independent, non-aligned for decades. And they are, one is in NATO, and the other one hopefully will soon be in NATO. So on the international stage, another crushing defeat for Russia and their inability to affect and influence other states. But as I said in my remarks, quantity has quality all its own. So if you want to go back to history, you can say 2022, 2021 kind of sort of are analogous to Finland in the Winter War in 1939. But 2023 is starting to look like Finland in 1940, where the mass of the Soviet army overcame the resistance in Finland. Are we seeing that play out in Ukraine? I don't know. I think 2024 would be a pivotal year in that regard. I think the support from the United States and from Europe itself, that's going to play out as well in 2024. And I didn't mention it in my remarks, but this is our election year also. And so the politics of Ukraine will be a part of that outcome in the long run.
Thank you, Admiral Harris. Good question, Alexander. Admiral Harris, let me just make one or two comments and then ask you another question related to a policy of containing and deterring North Korea. And you said, and I totally agree with you, the Washington Declaration, enhanced deterrence, and South Korea working with Japan and the United States on this enhanced deterrence is so powerful. And the Nuclear Consultative Group and other elements there, very, very meaningful. Visits of our nuclear-powered submarines to Busan and other manifestations of showing that we're there for South Korea and we're there for Japan. These are all very powerful statements. But the fact of the matter is, and you indicated in answer to Dr. Mansorov's questions, North Korea now is moving forward with solid fuel road mobile intercontinental ballistic missiles. 3 of them launched in 2023. Significant. So they're moving forward. And I think back to 1998 when I was in Beijing and we saw a Taipodang fly over Japan. And we said, my God, what was that? And now we've seen what was that. And at that time, Bill Perry, as Secretary of Defense, and Ash Carter came out with a very interesting op-ed saying this is an existential threat to the United States and our allies in the region. And we should, if it's on the launch pad, we should take it off the launch pad. And if it's launched, intercept it. But certainly take it off the launch pad. Now that they have road mobile and solid fuel rockets, ICBMs, to include certainly ICBMs. So the option of taking it off a launch pad is probably not there. In certain instances, maybe, but for the ICBM, certainly with the road mobile, not there. But we have a few minutes when they launch something to take it down. Have we sort of erred on the side of not taking proactive action initially to tell North Korea this is not acceptable? We cannot accept you launching ICBM, short-range ballistic missiles, Taipodong, and we don't know what's on the tip of them. We don't know what's on the tip of them. And therefore, these are existential threats to our allies and to the United States. So should we, I know it's hard, this is very hypothetical, maybe should we have been, and maybe should we be now, even more proactive in letting North Korea know that this is extreme bad behavior, and it's affecting our security and the security of our allies. So in the area of being as audacious as we can, and I know President Yoon Suk-yeol put out the peace proposal, an audacious peace proposal. Should we be equally audacious when we tell North Korea, stop this escalation and come back to negotiations? Because we can stumble into conflict, and we may have to do something to prevent us moving into conflict. So how do you see this development with now ICBMs, road mobile, solid fuel, and the fact of the matter is that containing North Korea, now that they're part of the axis of authoritarian states, they have China and Russia, and sanctions don't really work any longer with the UN Security Council. How do we sort of better contain North Korea and better deter North Korea, and maybe get them to realize they've got to come back to negotiations, or they've got to cease this extreme escalation that they're doing?
Yeah, great question, important question. I don't have the answer for you. If I did, I probably wouldn't be sitting in this chair. I'd be sitting in some other chair. So we lost an opportunity for coercive response back in '98, probably. When Dr. Perry and Dr. Carter wrote that op-ed, and now we're well beyond that. We're 26 years now beyond that, and the capability that North Korea presents is significantly more than it was in '98. So we probably lost that preemptive capability unless we view a direct threat against us or our allies. I mean, a direct threat, that if we don't do something preemptively, then we could suffer a nuclear attack against Guam, Hawaii, the West Coast, the East Coast of the United States, Japan, Korea, Australia, Philippines, any of our allies. So that becomes a problem. It's hard to contain North Korea when they have that long border with China. China is the key, and if China is not willing to exert more pressure on North Korea, we should perhaps exert more pressure on China, rather. And then they have a small border with Russia, and we see that the relationship between Russia and North Korea, that relationship is coming closer, driven by necessity. North Korea's quest for technology and Russia's quest for weaponry.
Thank you, Admiral Harris. Dr. Mansourov.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador. Admiral, I have two small questions for you. One is a curveball question, another is a straight shooting question. Which one do you want to get first?
Oh man, how about the curveball and then the straight shooting?
Okay. Curveball is very simple. The U.S. Pacific Air Force announced plans to rebuild an airfield in Tinian Island. And of course, this is the island which was used for the nuclear strike against Japan back in 1945. The B-29 bombers took off from there. So my curveball question is, I mean, you're a former Pacific 24th Pacific commander, Indo-Pacific commander. So if you have any insight for us, what's the mission for that new airfield? Is it to divert the attention from Guam, or are we preparing for an eventuality with China, you know, and the need to host some strategic assets in that part of the world there? Again, there's some rumors that are floating out there, and I just would like to know whether you might have any insight for us in this sense.
Yeah, I don't have too much insight on it. You should, you know, it's been, you have to go back 3 commanders before you find me in that seat back there now. You should ask Admiral Aquilino that question. But I believe that you sort of answered it in the framing of the question, right? It's all the above. It's dispersal. It creates hard targeting for any adversary because we're spread out more. So that's one. It's a divert field in case of an emergency or some like issue comes up. It's a place you can divert aircraft to and all that. So I think it functions both as a dispersal of forces capability and as an emergency divert capability, which is needed. We need to spread our forces out in the Indo-Pacific, and Tinian provides an opportunity to do just that.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So here's my straight shooting question. Looking over the horizon, let's say a year from now, at the end of this year, 2024, what are your predictions? I mean, what do you expect to see on the Korean Peninsula? One, more stronger, more confident North Korea, or another war, whatever. In Northeast Asia in general, two, US-China clash, I don't know, more or less the same thing. And finally, globally, President Trump's victory, our abandonment of all our allies or whatever. So what are your 3 predictions or 3 expectations for the end of this year, 365 days from now? Where do you think we will be in Korea, in Northeast Asia, and in the world as a whole? I know you hate this probably, to make
I think that's more the curveball than the
but
other, to be honest with you. But so I'm a poor predictor. I mean, my investment strategy reflects my predictive ability. My investment strategy has been to buy high and sell low. So my predictions on the global stage haven't gone much better than that. I'll give you some ideas, I guess. On the Korean Peninsula, I think we'll see a more confident North Korea. I mean, there's nothing in the trajectory that tells me that North Korea is somehow going to become less confident over the course of this year. So I think we'll see a more confident North Korea. I think in the South, we'll see a stronger Korean military and a stronger Korea-U.S. alliance, even though in 2024, we're going to see politics, internal South Korean politics play an even greater role as we roll into 2025. We're going to have elections in Korea, parliamentary elections later this year. So that'll shape how Korea starts to look at the issues on the peninsula and globally. We see a new foreign minister in South Korea. former South Korean ambassador to the UN, Mr. Cho. His first commentary about China are a little bit concerning. You know, he seeks to strike an equivalency between China and the United States. There is no equivalency. South Korea has only one ally that will have its back if North Korea invades, and China is not that country. So, you know, we'll have to see how that plays out. In Northeast Asia and East Asia, really, I think we'll see continued belligerence and bad behavior by the PRC, but I don't think it'll rise to the level of kinetic actions between China and the United States. You know, General Minahan at Air Mobility Command said 2025 it could be the year that China invades Taiwan. Admiral Davidson said 2027 China could invade Taiwan. I always say that the 2020s was a decade of danger, and if nothing bad happens by 2029, I want to start saying the 2030s are the decade of danger, right? So I think that we're going to see continued aggressive behavior by the PRC, but I don't think it'll rise to the level of kinetic actions between them and us. Globally, I think the Mideast, we haven't seen the worst of that yet. I think things will continue to heat up, not only with Israel and Hamas, but I think the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Iraq, I think that'll continue to draw us, the United States, into the fray there, even as we face our own election year. I'm not going to predict in January what the outcome of our election will be in November, but the run-up to the election for the next 11 months will certainly frame how we deal with some of these issues globally, for sure. And I think Ukraine will see more of the same there. I think, you know, they're going to get F-16s here soon, and that could help. But again, the biggest key to Ukraine's success is going to be the continued support from the West, and that support is certainly being debated in capitals in the West.
So Admiral Harris, if I may, I know we're coming to the hour, but let me make a comment and then over to you with the last question. You know, having negotiated with the North Koreans and having heard many, many times from the North Koreans, this was not only during the six-party talks, but during subsequent track 1.5 meetings with their foreign minister, deputy foreign minister. We want a good relationship with the United States. But again, it was conditional. Accept us as a nuclear weapon state, the way you accept Pakistan, and treat us that way, and we could be a good friend of the United States. We do not want to be tethered to China, and we know that the history between the Korean Peninsula and China has always been tense, where China often viewed North Korea or the Korean Peninsula itself as a vassal state, and so forth. So are we? The sense is, if North Korea does want that relationship with the United, and we saw some of this with the former President Donald Trump, with his meetings with Kim Jong-un, when they were moving, and of course it failed in Hanoi in February of 2019, when North Korea wanted sanctions all lifted, but not putting all their programs on the table, their nuclear programs, and that's the rub, where North Korea wants to retain that nuclear capability and so forth. So my final question is this: if North Korea, and we have, you know, since 1994 with the agreed framework, until the President Donald Trump in 2019, we've had these negotiations with North Korea where they talk about a good relationship with the U.S. We don't want to be tethered to China and so forth. Are we giving up in not trying to resolve something with North Korea? If we're looking at contain and deter, and North Korea, as you correctly said, is going on their own path, and there'll be more tension, and we'll probably see conflict in the Korean Peninsula and so forth. Is there further to President Yoon Suk-yeol or his audacious program to North Korea? Should we not still be seeking another path? Maybe this is putting hope as a strategy, and hope is not a strategy, certainly. But we have a lot of experience working with North Korea. It's not that this is a black hole totally. And there is history there that says China has viewed North Korea as a vassal state, and North Korea has pushed back on that. So is there, if there was one thing from you, Admiral Harris, is there some possibility that we, in addition to containing and deterring, that we could use other means to sort of get North Korea off this escalatory path that they're on now, that could lend itself to conflict on the Korean Peninsula?
Yeah, so I'll go back to what I said before, Ambassador DeTrani, and that's, idealism has to be rooted in realism. North Korea had a golden opportunity, an opportunity the like of which they will probably never get again. And you mentioned it, and this was Singapore in 2018 with President Trump, followed by Hanoi just several months later. They had an opportunity to have a different relationship with the United States, and the outcomes of Singapore, of which Kim Jong-un agreed to, included, among other things, a better relationship between the Pyongyang and Washington, and the turning its back on its own nuclear weapons program, and that would have meant a better future for the North Korean people. And there was clear statements that the United States was not after a regime change that we could accept as the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, but they couldn't have nuclear weapons. And Kim Jong-un agreed to all this in Singapore, and it fell apart in Hanoi. So if that golden opportunity was presented to North Korea and they turn their back on it, then I'll go back to what I said in my remarks, which is, in my opinion, the time for trying to negotiate away North Korea's nuclear program with North Korea has reached its useful end. And we should stop trying to do this and instead work to strengthen our relationship and our capability and our readiness and our resilience with South Korea. And continue to work with China, with Russia, and the like, to move North Korea in that regard. But Kim Jong-un is clear. I mean, you could believe it or not, but I tend to take him at his word, right? I mean, Maya Angelou would said that, when people tell us who they are, we should believe them the first time. So Kim Jong-un has told us who he is over and over again, and shame on us if we don't believe it. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Admiral Harris. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Jenkins.
Well, thank you, Ambassador DeTrani. This is one of our best programs I've seen. And also, I'm really encouraged by Admiral Harris, and the profound insights we're getting from this program can be studied and developed, and also will really be helpful to those that are actually directly engaging in all these issues. Dr. Mansourov, once again, thank you for your always very interesting insights and curveballs. And thank you to all, especially the Washington Times, for covering this program. They are covering this for the Washington Brief, and we thank them for that. And I want everybody to have a great 2024. Thank you.